How's it going guys, Chris here, and in today's guide we're going to be checking out all the main weapons and equipment you'll be able to use over the Dead Space Remake's campaign, giving you the general gist of what they all are, along with a few tips thrown in for good measure. From deadly industrial tools to useful abilities, giving you an edge in certain combat scenarios. So the bread and butter of Isaac's arsenal is the good old trusty plasma cutter, found at the very start of the game. A really iconic weapon in the Dead Space universe, yet a super simplistic one regarding its overall design. This thing isn't even technically a weapon, but more of an engineering tool used in mining operations, emitting 3 bright beams of light to allow the user to line the cutter up with whatever the hell needs cutting, in this case necromorph limbs, where it can then fire out plasma bolts quickly and accurately along the path of those 3 beams, chopping into whatever they come into contact with. It's a lightweight tool, allowing the user to operate it easily with a single hand, as seen in the game, yet a very deadly one, with those highly concentrated pulses of superheated matter being able to split through material super effectively. Of course, being an improvised weapon, the plasma cutter's primary target is typically going to be those necromorph appendages, hacking them off using slow but powerful shots, with its secondary fire function just simply being reserved to switch the alignment head between vertical and horizontal modes, rotating the cutter to get a better aim at a specific target. You can use this to your advantage in combat, adjusting its line of fire to deal with certain limbs more effectively. And because its plasma bolts travel extremely quickly, this lets them reach their target almost instantly, which is great for taking on fast moving enemies or ones that are further away in the distance. The plasma cutter can be upgraded with a heat accumulator, letting it essentially set fire to enemies and inflict burning damage over time. Plus it can also be fitted with a cartridge rack increasing ammo, along with weighted blades to add extra knockdown power during melee swings. More of an ability to assist in combat rather than a physical weapon, you'll be able to find a Stasis Module along your journey, a device which fits to your suit, capable of manipulating time within a small area, essentially slowing down your enemies along with other dangerous hazards in the environment. This is basically what it was designed to be used for, slowing down malfunctioning equipment so it can be safely repaired. Stasis pulses can be launched through the air, slowing down whatever they hit, with available pulses being displayed on the back of your rig suit, via an indicator on the right side. This energy can be recharged by visiting stasis stations found on walls, along with using special packs found in the environment, with stasis being a really handy little piece of equipment to halt an angry necromorph in their tracks, and let you deal with them much easier, having a lot less movement to contend with, while preventing them from getting too close for comfort. Though just be aware that stasis doesn't last forever, so you'll have to try and get the job done before its effect wears off, resuming their speed at a normal pace. Because stasis affects a small area, this essentially gives it a splash effect, so if there's a bunch of necromorphs all grouped together, it's often best to aim for the middle to try and affect multiple enemies with one projectile. If you can though, try and reserve it for situations where you really need it, for when some of the deadlier necromorphs decide to pop out, or for when you're overwhelmed by loads of enemies all flooding the screen at once. By completing the side mission called Premeditated Malpractice, you'll be able to get an upgrade for your Stasis Module, shocking and immobilizing enemies hit by it, thus making its effect even more productive. Next up is the Motorized Pulse Rifle, a military-grade combat weapon primarily used by security and armed forces. You'll be able to pick this gun up from a dying officer in Chapter 2, once you reach the tram station at the medical deck, and it's actually a lot more effective this time around than it was in the original back in 2008. The primary mode is essentially a rapid-firing assault rifle, shooting out loads of shots really quickly to deliver sustained damage over the course of time. Its projectiles might be weaker than with other weapons, like those plasma cutter shots, though being able to blast out so many so quickly will still let you tear off those limbs and deal with enemy weak spots just as easily, providing you can stay on target and keep those streams of bullets lined up with the enemy. You'll burn through lots of ammo quickly, so it's best to keep an eye on your reserves, and it's often a good idea to fire off streams of shots in shorter bursts to retain higher amounts of accuracy, especially when you're up against a necromorph who's further away in the distance. The Pulse Rifle's secondary mode allows you to launch an explosive proximity mine, letting you lay down traps for oncoming enemies to dash into, or function like a bit of a grenade launcher when you choose to fire at them directly. It's going to cost you 25 ammo, but the trade-off can often be worth it, with the blast able to damage multiple enemies at once and prevent them from reaching you along those narrow corridors and choke points, particularly useful when you're surrounded. The Pulse Rifle can be upgraded to fire faster, hold more ammo, and give those mines a bit of extra bang, and when fully upgraded, it can be one of the more useful weapons in your entire arsenal, being effective against most enemy types, reliable in most situations. If you want to be a smart Dead Space player, then you'll definitely want to take advantage of your Kinesis Module, which you'll be able to pick up and use near the start of Chapter 2. Kinesis lets you pick up and move objects around the environment, and although you'll naturally need to use it to advance through the game and solve some of its puzzles, it can also make for a great weapon too, being something that helps you utilise the environment while letting you save on some ammo. You can grab objects found in the room and throw them over towards oncoming necromorphs to dish out damage and knock them back, with its effect being stronger and deadlier the more you upgrade Kinesis along your suit's tree at the bench. Although you can lob a lot of those loose things found in the environment, it's often best to keep a lookout for explosive canisters to throw, giving you a high damage attack over range which can potentially kill several enemies at once. And it's definitely a good idea to keep an eye out for spear-like objects too, with these being able to take out most of the normal enemies instantly, impaling them while being sent flying through the air, pinning them up against a nearby wall. You can get pretty creative with Kinesis, using hacked off necromorph limbs against your opponents, with slasher arms and exploder bombs both being deadly things to lob back at your enemies, letting you save your ammo for another, while dealing high amounts of damage at the same time. Definitely a strategy you should try and get used to during fights. A pretty dangerous mining tool designed to cut through rocks and minerals, the Disc Ripper is essentially a machine which fires out circular blades, which are attached to a gravity tether, allowing said blades to hover in front of the Ripper, spinning around at rapid speeds to slice through material. You can find the Ripper in Chapter 3 while travelling through the engineering deck at the bottom of a ramp, and it functions in a bit of a different way to a lot of the other tools you'll find in the game, being very effective in specific fights, but also a pretty situational thing. Those levitating saw blades have a limited range, making it more of a defensive close quarter weapon, able to hack through oncoming necromorph limbs while keeping them at bay as they approach, making the Ripper useful against enemies which chase you down to attack up close, but not exactly great against the ones that prefer to keep a bit of distance, like the lurkers and the splitters for example. Because of the saw's knockback effect, this can really help with crowd control, in scenarios where you're overwhelmed by several necromorphs at once, preventing them from getting within striking distance. Though the Ripper's secondary function allows you to eject those Ripper blades forwards, letting it deal damage against enemies further away, outside of the tether's reach. This is a pretty effective thing to know to get the most out of each blade, able to fire them off while they're hovering in the air without using up any additional ammo. So chop up a bunch of angry necromorphs that are getting right up in your grill, and then blast off that blade to hit another one that's hanging around further away. It's good to know that ejected blades will ricochet off walls, so in enclosed areas with multiple enemies, this can make them even more effective, especially if you upgrade the Ripper, making those blades stronger and capable of ricocheting more times, which is perfect for those tight corridors and small rooms. Another up close and personal weapon is the Flamethrower, found in a dead guy not too long after the Ripper in Chapter 3, as you move through a corridor filled with corruption. This basically does what it says on the tin. It lets you cook your enemies alive with a short-range flame, dishing out sustained burning damage in the area in front. Its operation is simple, being another tool to use against closer range targets, though because that fire spreads over the immediate area, unlike those Ripper blades that need to be aimed more precisely, this can generally make it an easier weapon to use, being something that deals damage over time as your enemy burns, therefore being best fired in shorter bursts to save on ammo, rather than long continuous streams. It doesn't have the same knockback effect that the Ripper blades have, perhaps making it less effective at defending from oncoming attackers, though it can dish out the damage to multiple enemies at once, still giving it good crowd control purposes, being especially effective against a lot of the smaller, weaker necromorphs like the Swarmers, Creepers and Divider parts, which are known to attack together in larger groups and can sometimes be trickier to hit with other weapons, due to their speed and small size. One thing that can help to fend off those oncoming necromorphs, however, is the Flamethrower's Firewall secondary function, shooting a projectile at the floor which ignites and spreads to create a horizontal barrier of flames. This is best used as a defensive area denial tool, to give yourself a bit of breathing room while you're surrounded by necromorphs all closing in at once, preventing your enemies from crossing the lingering wall of fire, causing them to burn as they stupidly run into it, also giving you a nice opportunity to blast them away from the other side, while you're temporarily protected from their onslaught. Probably the most devastating weapon you'll be able to wield in Dead Space is a high-powered engineering tool called the Contact Beam, used to soften and split tough materials such as meteors, allowing the user to extract the ore from within. You'll be able to find the Contact Beam in Chapter 4 in the Records Office along a zero-gravity hallway, And as the name implies, this thing fires out a deadly focused beam of energy, which practically obliterates whatever it comes into contact with, making it a very high damage weapon. Perfect for dealing with some of the tougher necromorph forms, or just to simply turn some of the weaker ones into soup. Holding the trigger down will emit a beam continuously, draining energy and ammunition over time, which can run out fairly quickly, making it a weapon that's often best used sparingly. When it is used though, it will rapidly break down limbs and destroy most necromorphs within a matter of seconds, able to be swept around to hit multiple targets in the room, one after the other. If you thought that beam was powerful, the gun's secondary fire is even more brutal, basically being an asteroid cutter. This focuses the tool's energy into a super strong shot, which takes a little bit of time to charge up to full power, but when it does, it can unleash a blast which is capable of killing most enemies instantly, while severely weakening some of the stronger ones, like the Phantoms. This secondary function can be upgraded to become even more powerful, with a larger blast radius and explosion. And all in all, the contact beam is generally a necromorph's worst enemy, having several ways to inflict tons of damage very fast. If you fancy having a beefed up version of the plasma cutter with a much wider horizontal beam, then the line gun might be the tool you're looking for, being a pretty similar device with the same sort of job, but obviously a lot more effective and potentially deadly. This can be found in Chapter 5 during your wander through the medical deck, though you'll have to go into an emergency equipment storage room just off the main path. The line gun does have its limitations, firing slower and holding less ammo than the plasma cutter, while also being unable to switch to a vertical mode too. But having that much wider blast lets it hack off multiple limbs with ease, also dealing higher amounts of damage to compensate, making each shot all the more punishing. Those blasts are so powerful, they're also able to pass through multiple targets at once, making the gun even more useful in situations where several enemies are together and behind each other, being able to rip through groups of necromorphs all congregating along a narrow corridor or hallway. You can easily take down lurkers in single blasts, hacking off all of those tentacles in one sweep, providing they're on a horizontal surface that is, and you can also kill other enemies like slashers really quickly too, generally best going for the legs first to slow them down, and then finishing them off by hitting the arms and head. The line gun also does a pretty fancy trick, with its secondary mode laying down laser traps, which slice through enemies who pass through them, chopping some of the weaker ones up into pieces, while softening up the stronger ones, making them easy to take care of with your primary fire. It's best to keep in mind that these laser traps can also hurt you, so probably not a great idea to start firing them everywhere, as they can also make the combat zone smaller, essentially trapping yourself into an area if you're not careful. But smart placement of these mines can really help to make hectic fights more bearable, letting you hold down positions easier against larger groups. And by upgrading the line gun, you can make these traps even more powerful, by boosting the damage while also adding more lasers per trap to cover a wider span. So the last of the main weapons you'll be able to find during a playthrough of Dead Space is the Force Gun. Definitely one of the coolest tools in the game. This is found in Chapter 6 on the Hydroponics deck, in a room called West Seedling Room A, which you'll need level 2 security to access. The Force Gun itself kinda plays out like a short-range shotgun style weapon, emitting a high-powered kinetic blast which throws enemies backwards while ripping off their hardened skin, exposing the weaker muscle structure underneath. With the Force Gun having such a wide area of effect, it's another great crowd control tool, dealing with several enemies at once in close range, being able to wipe through gangs of swarmers, guardian pods and divider spawn much easier than with other guns that have a more focused line of fire. It's also super effective against twitchers, definitely some of the trickier enemies you'll face due to their erratic movements, though the Force Gun will make their encounters far less of a problem, often destroying their Stasis Modules in a single blast, slowing them down, keeping them at bay, thus making them easier targets to finish off. Unlike in the original version of Dead Space, the Force Gun now has access to a gravity well, being its secondary function, and this launches a bomb which pretty much hoovers up all the enemies and objects around it, keeping them all temporarily fixed into a single spot. This not only pairs up well with the Force Gun's primary fire, letting you blast away all those necromorphs bunched up together, but also with your other weapons too, like the Flamethrower and Pulse Rifle's mine launcher. Plus it's also a great way to prevent loads of enemies all ganging up on you, especially when you upgrade the gravity well to deal damage, have a bigger radius, and last longer, making that gravity effect even more productive. And so those are all the main weapons and abilities you can expect to pick up and use in the Dead Space Remake, and doing so will also grant you with an achievement or trophy called Full Arsenal. Hope you enjoyed the guide, thumbs up if you did, and subscribe if you want to see more content on Dead Space and other games. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in that next one.